Thank you so much for joining Virtual Voices once again. I'm Elizabeth Pruch with the Leadership Foundation. I am charged with ensuring our alumni stay engaged, which is exactly why we started Virtual Voices. This is a series developed originally in response to COVID-19 to keep you all engaged and active and informed. Our goal is to invite alumni and leaders in the space that have been impacted in their industries with these challenging times and asking them to share their perspectives and their stories, all through that leadership lens. We want to make sure we're understanding how we're leading through these tough times. And so today's focus is going to be on education. We have three amazing individuals that I'll introduce in just a moment. Just a few housekeeping pieces first. We have Megan Vivier, who is managing the technical side of this call. Thank you, Megan. We couldn't do it without her. That is for sure. If you have any technical issues, feel free to message her privately in the chat function. This is being recorded, just so you know, and we will have it available on our website within 48 hours after this is happening, so you can share it with whomever you'd like. Everyone is currently on mute, just to eliminate the background noise. So if you unmute to ask a question, please just mute it again. We will have the opportunity to mute it for you as well. And we are going to manage all questions through the chat feature. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat function. I will then call on you one by one where you can ask that out loud. If you have a question for a specific speaker, then please do call that speaker by name. Otherwise, we'll do our best to ensure everybody gets a chance to answer it if it fits for that reason. So please let me introduce our three amazing speakers. We're really fortunate to have them. Dr. Janine Davidson, she is the president of Metro State University of Denver, which is the state's third largest public university, serving more than 20,000 students. She's got an incredibly impressive background, which you can learn more about on the network, but prior to MSU, she served as the 32nd Undersecretary of the United States Navy and the President's appointed Chief Management Officer for the Navy and Marine Corps. She is a tremendous individual. We are very lucky to have her on our board of directors at the Leadership Foundation, and she does much more beyond this. But thank you, Janine, for being here. We appreciate it. We've also got Genya Herndon. She serves as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student and Community Engagement at the University of Colorado Denver Anschutz Medical Campus, which is why some of you just heard all of her knowledge on the medical side of this. In her role, though, she has oversight of the offices of student life and campus community. We're proud also to name her in 2018 as an Outstanding Impact Denver alum for the Leadership Foundation. She will say, of course, as most people would if they are parents, her proudest accomplishment is her teenage daughter and her 4-year-old son. She is also the proud wife of Denver City Councilman Chris Herndon, who we are proud to also call an alum of the foundation, and she loves anything Denver has to offer. So we are so glad you live here in Denver, Genya. Thank you for joining us. Finally, we've got Rich Martinez. He is the president and CEO of Young Americans, which I went to when I was a child. I did those camps. I was just telling my husband, I can't wait to send my kids there as well. He is responsible for managing and ensuring the success of Young Americans Bank and the nonprofit programs of the Young Americans Center and Financial Education. He was appointed by Governor Ritter to serve as on the State of Colorado Board of Community Colleges and Occupational Education in 2010 and was later elected as the chairman of the board. Personally, he loves to spend time with his family and his dog Tucker. I never did ask what kind of dog it was, but those dogs are loving life right now, right? They're getting a lot more attention these days. And you can find Rich on the tennis courts, regularly playing with his men's groups. And I told him I would gladly be a ball girl any day because my hand-eye coordination is terrible. So welcome to the three of you. We are thrilled to have all of you. We are going to get started. And I do encourage all of you on the call to feel free to ask questions in that chat function at any time. I'll call on you when we see something come up. I'm going to start by asking each one of our speakers a question. You're welcome to stop after each one and ask a question if you have something to ask them. But I'm going to start with you, Janine, and if you could tell us a little bit more, you know, the education system, of course, has been really uprooted. Things have changed pretty dramatically. Can you talk to us about the first few weeks after the stay-at-home order went into effect and you had to really lead your campus and your staff and faculty through the changes that were happening and what that looked like?
Sure. Thanks for having us on. This is, I don't know if you noticed, but I just popped off and popped on again because I was having connection issues. So came on just in time for you to ask that question.
Okay.
You know, actually, we were virtual before the stay-home order. What happened was we had a pretty robust contingency planning process going on, led by our COO, Larry Sampler. And We started it back in January and people thought we were crazy. We thought, oh, well, it'll just be practice, right? So, and then turns out everything we thought was going to happen started happening. And it was like this train that was so far away. And then it started moving, right? And so we were ready for it, but then it started moving faster and faster. And we had a town hall and we told the faculty, like, it was sort of your be prepared order, like it's time to get your class ready to go online. And we had our whole online team trying to help faculty members who hadn't done that before, and they had training sessions and one-on-one outreach, and everybody was ready. And then by the end of that same day, we said, no, actually you will go online when you get back from spring break. So it was like the train started accelerating. And then meanwhile, simultaneously on the other side of the campus, we were having the administrative teams practice working from home because
Genya, we may want to come back to you. Maybe try logging off and on again. It looks like all of a sudden we're having some technical issues there. But I want to keep hearing about this train. So Megan will work with you on that. We could try again, but let's move to Genya real quick while we try to figure that out. And Genya, while I'm interested in that exact same question for you, I do want to ask, your team works directly with students, and you've had a lot of contact, I know, with faculty and your students. So what's been the biggest change you've seen over the last month, and how are you adapting to that, whether it relates to students and or your team?
So I think that, you know, there's been a lot of changes, and I think for faculty and administration, as well as our staff. And I'll have to say, though, from a student perspective, I think it depended, you know, their response or their ability to respond to this was very dependent upon where they're at in their student life cycle, as we kind of talk about. So we've got considerations being given to our prospective students and students, you know, who are planning on starting their freshman year with us and or transferring into us in the fall or the summer. And then you have our students, our current students, you know, and they can be anywhere in their process in terms of their degree attainment. And then we've got alums too that we also have to consider. And then not to mention what's happening out at the Anschutz campus with the programs there and the different labs and the clinical experience that a lot of our students are required to have before graduation. And so the timing of all of this is for some more unfortunate than others in terms of our ability to sort of support and or accommodate sort of, you know, where they're at with their degree planning. But remote learning was something, just like Janine said, that we were actually already doing in many cases. I think the students, part of the team that I also oversee includes veterans and also disability resources. And I think, you know, really, you know, looking at our different populations, whether again, they're prospective students, current students, alums, but within that, you know, those populations, there's also subpopulations that we have to be really mindful of as well, in terms of how we've had to make shifts in our ability to sort of, you know, provide them the experience, the student experience that we want to make sure that they have, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. But then in addition to that, sort of our partnership with them as they're looking to attain their degree, no matter where they're at in that process. And so remote learning is just, I think it's easy to say, but there's so much built into that that I think people don't completely understand. I mean, currently we still have students on campus, and I think that people think everybody has gone home. We have students that couldn't go home. We have international students, and we also have students who had, if they went home, they would be putting their families at risk, grandmas, grandpas, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, who might be receiving cancer treatments or whatever, where if a student had gone home, that could have been putting them at risk. And so we're still housing those students at Links Crossing right now and providing programming and services, including dining, to those students. We have currently about 76 still left in the housing unit. And also we're planning on having that space available and open this summer for students who need it, who still have internships or whatever may be happening.
Wow, I didn't realize you still had folks on campus. That's great. And it's good to know that you can be adaptable and make something like that work for you guys. Thank you for doing that for them.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Janine, do we have you back? Not yet, it looks like. Okay, we're still working on that. Rich, you focus on a different type of education and such an important piece of education, right? Literacy is incredibly important. Some could argue now more than ever because we really need to understand what this means for our economy. So tell me about what's changed at Young Americans, and how are you ensuring that we're not skipping a beat with our youth right now and continuing to allow them to learn and be educated?
Yeah, it's actually been incredibly difficult because what I think most of you know, and Elizabeth, you went through the program, and most of our viewers probably have been through the program. We focus on hands-on real life learning. And so switching that to a virtual world and trying to make sure we continue that impact was a little difficult, but we have a great team. So we first started by retooling our most popular programs and what teachers have been trained on, Young American and International Town, so that all of the curriculum can be used in any e-learning platform, so that teachers can keep that learning going on, and then reminding them that each of those lessons meets certain educational standards so that they have that in their hip pocket. I think a lot of kids are getting some fatigue on those basic subjects, and so being able to bring in financial literacy, as you said, which is a very important topic, is very important at this time. And then we've also started developing online curriculum, virtual summer camps, and different, we're calling virtual programming that will come out here in the next week. We retooled all of our Girl Scout badge classes, and those have started this last week, as well as our Youth Biz Entrepreneurial Camps. They're doing a branding series right now. They're doing manufacturing series, I think, starting this next week, where they mailed all the manufacturing packets to the kids so that they could be doing them online with our staff. And we're doing a variety of in-person live and recorded programming. But as you said, this is a time that I think families are feeling uncertain about their future and their finances. And so having these kids not only do programming themselves, but extending that to those families and having family discussions, we found is very important. We're in the midst of a longitudinal study, and the last data that we got back on the path to our final findings were the impact that our young people have on their parents. It's very easy to dismiss a colleague when they ask about do you have a budget? How are your family finances? But if your 10-year-old or your 12-year-old comes home and says, Mom, Dad, how is that family budget looking? What can we afford and not? The discussion is a little different. And so that impact is great. So we want to make sure that our students, our families, our parents, and our bank customers continue to have good content so they can continue working through those financial literacy kind of dilemmas as they go through this with the changes in the economy.
That's fantastic to include the parents in with that. I think you find that in every industry, that when an entire family and a child support system is engaged in what they're learning, it makes such a difference. So good job. I think that's a wonderful silver lining coming out of this. It sounds like Janine is still not quite on yet. The internet was looking strong before, but I'd like to, be sure that, and we've got Kenneth Ho has a question. So Kenneth, the stage is yours, and we will be sure to get back to Janine when she comes back on. But Kenneth, it's all you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Thanks,
we can hear you.
And it's unfortunate that Janine's not on because this question is kind of for her as well. But we've heard a lot about how this crisis has exposed equity or inequity issues out there. Are there opportunities in the education space to actually look at this as an opportunity to increase equity as we look at that? I think so many folks, and certainly if you want to talk about how you're addressing, each of you are addressing equity issues, but I could see distance learning and remote learning potentially breaking down some of the barriers that exist out there, as long as we can get the access to Wi-Fi and internet and technological resources right.
Kayla, do you want to start that? Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly talk a lot about. I think we all are committed to access to education. All, Metro, CU Denver, all institutions have, and then certainly what's happening at Young American, we're all committed to that access and that equity. And I think it's absolutely true. I think that in any time that we experience something new, we see where, and healthcare is seeing this as well. We're seeing it in, even the numbers of patients and the different, types of patients which are coming in, and their access to healthcare and the disparities that are there. And that's true with education as well, in our ability to provide a quality educational experience to our students. I think what's interesting, besides like talking about equipment or Wi-Fi or anything like that, is also, I think, something that needs to be brought into this conversation along, as we talk about equity, is also mental health and the mental health of our students. And I think that that's also rising to the top of our conversations. I think as what we're preparing for is, this has created a lot for a lot of different people, whether it's our students or our faculty or our staff, and mental health is absolutely going to be something, and our ability to provide those services may be difficult to do in some cases. And I think that in itself is a disparity too that we need to start addressing as well. And part of our ability to provide an equitable education to our students as well. I think probably the one thing that resonated with me most was I was talking to one of our students, and I was just asking, how's your experience been? How are you doing? What's it like going online with some of your classes? And this is a student that predominantly had in-person classes, but had a couple hybrid classes. And what she noted to me, which I also found, I'm also a student, I'm getting my doctorate right now, is that there's some people who are willing to have their faces on camera, and there are some that are not. And I think that some of that is also respectful of the fact in which the environments that they're currently learning in as well. There are some students who don't feel comfortable sharing their home life or their personal lives as well. And sometimes faculty have to be aware of those differentiations and accept those differences. So just because you're not showing your face doesn't mean necessarily that you're not present or that you're not active in the class or the work. So it's taking sort of what we're used to doing, that in-person work, and as leaders too. I talk a lot about, what I've learned, I think, in some of this is that, in working through this, leadership is what matters. It's not the location. And I think that that's also what we're trying to see and build up in our staff and our faculty, is that it doesn't matter where we're at, it's how we're supporting each other through this. I think if nothing else, we have learned how inextricably connected we are and need to be to survive these types of things. And so as we address equity issues, and as we address the disparities that we have in healthcare and education and elsewhere, it's bottom line, it's how do we show up for each other and help to fill in those gaps so that we can be better as we learn from this experience, because we're all learning forward together. But yeah, this is definitely, I think, showed us places that we can be better and should be better.
I also just see, and thank you for that, Genya, I've seen just a tremendous amount of content coming out in terms of from the education space. And those resources before might only have been accessible if you were enrolled at a certain institution or could attend a certain thing live. And I'm wondering whether that could now be more of an avenue for equal access. I know that there are still other issues associated with, how all that translates through. But if you think about just what things may be accessible on one campus or one school system or one college or whatever it is, and kind of democratizing that, is that a way to potentially start making more variety available that wasn't available before?
Probably, and it's interesting, I was on something similar to this yesterday with the Chronicle for Higher Education. They were holding a sort of an innovation and leadership summit, if you will, and I think here's what was really fascinating, is that institutions that we all thrived and see as, they're doing it the best or whatever, they're actually really kind of struggling right now. And it's the institutions that have been purely online, like the Southern New Hampshire universities and GWs, they're fine, they're thriving, and actually their enrollment is skyrocketing right now, because I think that, folks are seeing, that this could be going on for some time now, and that experience, that in-person experience, is not going to be one that might be something that appeals to them right now until some things get figured out. That being said, you know, we're learning from each other right now. But what I did hear, and this was in a separate thing, is the president, Paul Quinn College, quoted something that I have been saying over and over again. It's in this new environment, higher ed institutions that are less in love with tradition and more in love with their students are going to be the ones that thrive. And so I think that that's sort of where we're really kind of designing how we're moving forward in this is around our students. It's all student centric, and it has to be, and being mindful of where they're at and meeting them there versus trying to create something that works for us.
That is really neat to hear that, centered around the students and not the tradition. Well, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Rich, did you want to add something?
You know, I'll answer it in context. Olka added a piece of what does, what does this look like for K-12 education going forward? And I think some of those inequities of kids not having technology, and those types of things are going to change, access as we talk about that. But I do think it's going to enhance and really highlight our in-person experiences. And I think schools have moved a lot towards really being selective on the outside experiences that they provide our youth because of costs and lots of different factors. We're looking at it as you do need to interact with people. I think this only goes so far. It's nice to have, video chats, but there is that human connection. Our economy thrives on it. Elizabeth, you going through Young Ameritown, it just is not the same if you're not having and hosting an economy face-to-face with your peers. That being said, a lot of content can be delivered in alternative formats that I think could assist teachers, help us get families more involved. I think Young Americans has always been focused on the youth, and I think we see this as an opportunity to include families in the broader conversation, as I meant before. But we're hoping we get back to that in-person piece, and that may be the culminating piece of a very long, ours is 26 lessons and 20 hours of curriculum for Young Ameritown. That is an extensive and a lot to ask of an educator to put into their classroom space. That being said, we reach 50% of Colorado fifth graders, and educators are making that commitment. That being said, could we get 80 or 90% of fifth graders if we have an online offering for curriculum to assist teachers to getting this product going easier, and then they come to one of our sites to really get that hands-on learning. But I'm still a fan of hands-on learning, and talking about my daughter's doing a graduate program, and it's a hybrid program, and she's missing the hybrid nature of it. She loved undergrad and connecting with professors, and it's just not quite the same. So,
yeah. I want to make sure we give Janine, welcome back, a chance to answer that. I do, however, as we go right before, I'll catch you up here, Janine, but Carol Bauer, I think you mentioned a wonderful piece that really ties into what Rich said, and that's that, the students that aren't able to manage themselves virtually during this, that have, I think, and Carol, why don't you speak to this, but at Gals Denver Charter Schools, it's not really about the access to the computers, it's how do we, if you're on the spectrum or intellectual disabilities, how do you manage yourselves virtually? So Carol, I think that's a wonderful point and something that we should all really consider as we're answering questions too, is what does that look like for everybody? Carol, did you have anything you wanted to add to that or question?
No, it's, it just as you were speaking and about it, like, is this, Kenneth, I think you asked, like, is this an opportunity for a new way that we can look at equity or maybe close the equity gap that we're seeing either with students with disabilities, students on lower socioeconomic status, or students who are English language learners? We're actually at the school level, we're seeing that divide even larger and larger and larger. And it's disheartening. So I like the idea that we could think about it in a way to help reduce the gap. But I think the biggest thing we're hearing from families, especially families with kids that have 504s or IEPs, is they don't always have the executive functioning to like manage themselves through even an hour of on, Zoomed or Googled face-to-face plus an assignment, like they actually do, especially we have kids that have one-on-one paraprofessionals that are usually with them all day long, and having that person still with them, but not having sort of the ability to physically sit with them and redirect them, et cetera, that's been really tough. And we also are experiencing a lot of our students whose parents are working out of the home, who work for UPS or work for whatever, where we as a school can call or text or talk to students at the beginning of every single day, but then they're still choosing not to get on when they have classes, and they're still not turning in work. So it's been a really difficult, it's been disheartening around equity measures, because we just see it widening in these last 6 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's very worth bringing up. Janine, so the question was, you may have picked up on, but Kenneth asked a great question earlier about just the inequities that we're seeing through this, and how you're looking at the opportunities coming out of this to help close that gap. So if you want to answer that, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. I've been on these calls nonstop, sunrise to sunset, and haven't had any trouble until now. So
Of course.
must be something you guys. The equity issue is concerning, definitely. I mean, as you know, MSU Denver is very much, open access. And so we're very focused on all of that for our students. And we're still collecting data, but I mean, I was sort of surprised at first the degree to which some students expressed a lot of anxiety about like finishing out online. We ended up handing out a lot of laptops and helping people get access to the internet. We have lots of working students who are also parents. And so that was a big challenge. I also feel like this whole pandemic lays bare so many of the issues in our society in general. This is one of them, but our healthcare system compared to other countries, all kinds of things. And so that's one thing. But then I also think, hopefully, this is 1, maybe 2 semesters, for people who are really worried about my 4th grader who's going to get behind. Maybe there's other things we could do for right now, but these big sort of structural inequities need to be addressed. And those of us that are on the front lines of this, that have been working on these inequity issues for so long, we know this is just boom, laying it bare. So if there's a silver lining, maybe there'll be more attention to these issues where we say, one of the things we've been talking about is on the backside of this pandemic, when we think about economic issues and infrastructure issues, the digital divide is a huge issue as well. And, trying to figure out how to really, really invest in that in Colorado and beyond, I think is also really important. So I just feel like it just lays bare things that people like us that have been working in these trenches have already known. And hopefully that'll, on the backside of this, raise more awareness and help us get more attention to solve these issues.
Thank you so much, Janine. I wonder if you wanted to continue telling us about the train, or if you are comfortable moving forward, but I think we left you high and dry, so I didn't want you to give.
No, just on the leadership piece, I think that the issue was about being agile and flexible. We ended up having to go virtual, like pretty much almost a week before we needed to. I mean, the classes were one thing, but just operating the university, we had our vice president tested positive on like St. Patrick's Day, and we had to close the campus down she was patient 0. So for all of our area campus. And so, 10 o'clock in the morning, by noon, we're closing the campus, and senior leadership is getting tested, which is weird because it wouldn't happen today. We wouldn't be allowed to get tested, and all sent home. And so just putting that structure in place, like in a minute, was a big leadership challenge. So we can talk more about that. I don't know where else the conversation has gone, so I'll leave it to you to ask the questions.
Well, you missed it all. We're done now. No, I'm just kidding. I do want to go back to Brent. Brent, I really like your questions, so why don't you ask away, please?
Okay, thanks for everyone being on the call. This is a historic moment, but we've had others like 9/11, natural disasters, environmental energy challenges, and often those hit at a time when people are learning. Have the leaders on this call engaged their students, board, faculty for an all hands on deck crowdsourcing of ideas and solutions for recovery and renewal, with the accent on inclusiveness?
That's a great question. Janine, you unmuted first. It's all yours.
Okay. The short answer is yes, absolutely. We did this really quickly. The contingency planning team was already going to pivot into sort of like the logistics about the fall and things like that. We had two areas where we really did this, and one was our budget crisis. And we did exactly that. We broke it into two pieces, the immediate parts of this fiscal year and then the next part for next fiscal year, where we knew we were going to have to take cuts. We know it's going to be painful, lots of anxiety across our faculty and our staff. And so, you know, my thing is to be very, very open and honest. So the first thing we did was laid out all the data. We said, this is what's going to happen to this university. Like, these are the numbers that the state is telling us. We will have to make cuts. Now is the time. And we opened what we called the idea catcher on the president's website. So anybody could put some ideas in. I tapped a faculty member to lead the effort so that it could free up the finance team. And he went out to all the leaders to get ideas on that. And then we set up a futures team. And that's to look at the post-pandemic. And they're just sort of kicking that off now. It was our strategic planning team, and we sort of just repurposed them and put them into a red team model, which I can talk about in more depth. But the idea is to think through alternative scenarios in the future. And then you game it out as though you were students, as though you were the government. And then you kind of come up with plans for how to position yourself in a post-pandemic era. So we're just getting started on that part. And that methodology I stole from my days in Washington.
Yeah, I'm familiar with red team, blue team, so go forth.
Red team,
Bravo,
blue,
Bravo Zulu.
green and white. Yes, the green team, yeah.
I like that idea of the idea catcher. I hope good stuff comes out of that. We heard from Kelly last week, and she said the same. She said, no idea is a bad idea right now. Bring them all, and let's figure this out together. So I love this question. We did
some interesting ideas, too.
Bet.
Part of it is reconfirming, because you see people coalescing on similar ideas, and then you see some out-of-the-box things that you're like, let's examine that, you know? So it's a cool thing.
Yeah. I want to give Rich and Genya a chance to answer this, but Carol, I'm with you. What's a red team? Carol is asking, what's a red team? Is this some...
Yeah, so a red team comes from wargaming. Some businesses are using it now, but the origin was, it's sort of your devil's advocate. So if you come up with a war plan, then you want to game it out, and you do like a tabletop or some sort of big multi-day exercise. And the red team are the bad guys. They get to play the bad guys. The green team would be sort of like the hapless civilians on the battlefield. And then you can create like a white team that would be sort of like government affairs or the United Nations or something like that. And so you can model that. And the blue team is, of course, yourself. So how do you respond? And you do the game in multiple moves and that kind of thing.
Fascinating.
It's pretty cool.
Well, that's a whole nother Virtual Voices session, but thank you. Rich, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Janine. I think communication is key. I am an auditor and a banker that may not be the best communicator. And so I rely on my team. Betsy Sklar is here to kind of tell me how to make sure that, exactly as Janine said, lay it out. I think that was some of their best advice, is saying, lay it out for staff. You know, well, I know I can sit down and look at all the numbers on a piece of paper and know exactly what needs to be done. It's listening to your team, and then getting through those tough decisions, which we did, and then empowering this team. I have been thoroughly just enjoyed working with them and amazed at, as Janine said, those ideas that I was like, wow, where'd you come up with that? As we try to take a hands-on real-life program virtual, the ideas that staff is executing on and came up with, I actually held our own little Shark Tank pitch competition with senior staff and myself to say, okay, let's pitch these ideas. And I was floored. Every one that I got out of, I was like, this is amazing. We really can retool our platform to look differently. But kind of from that, I would say listen, and that's a big one for me, is always listen and make sure you empower your team, because they really do have great ideas. And I found it with my team. I have great people and great ideas come from those great people.
Rich, I so appreciate that story. I mean, that's our Colorado civic DNA in action, right? That's an example of collaboration and leading from where you are. Anybody can lead right now, and it's going to take everybody to come up with those ideas. And that Shark Tank, what a fun way to engage your team to really share those ideas. So kudos to you. Genya, I want to make sure you have a chance to answer this question. And if you all have questions on the phone, please do submit them in the chat box. Genya?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we can all agree there's no playbook, right? And so we're constantly evolving and changing. And I think like both Rich and Dr. Davidson identified is that we've, what we've done at CU Denver and Anschutz is certainly built a team to be able to address various scenarios and think things through. But what I have noticed and recognized in this is that, as we endure this crisis, that there is a distinction between management and leadership. And I think we've got some teams right now that we have put out to really do the work of management. So addressing the urgent needs of our students, our staff, our faculty, really taking a look, like as I had talked about earlier, about the different populations of students that we need to be considering. So everything from our prospective students to our alumni, and then everything that's made up in between them, whether our veteran students, our students with disabilities, our students who are international, who can't get home. All of that is part of our makeup as we're managing the situation. And so the pace is fast and the actions have to be decisive. And so we've got people who've got that skill set geared towards that work. And then at the same time, leading by contrast sort of involves guiding people and our culture and our community to the best possible eventual outcome by championing the teams within our various campus community, and then adapting our process and being able to sort of look ahead and think forward. And so for me, that's been one of the biggest highlights and distinctions of my leadership is sort of seeing and seeking our managers and providing space also for leadership at the same time. And leaders can be anything and anybody, and that can come from anywhere. And so soliciting that advice and soliciting that feedback allows us to be a lot more adaptive, innovative, and ready to go for what's next.
I love that. And Oka, your question, Oka, I'm going to ask you to ask that out loud. I think this is such a tremendous question and really the focus of what we want to hear from the three of you. So the mic is yours, Oka, if you want to unmute. She's finding the unmute.
There we go.
There we are.
The cursor goes across multiple screens.
Right.
So thank you all, because I feel like you've touched on what leadership lessons have been underscored for you and sort of shown to be valuable. But I'm wondering, what as leaders are you having to let go of or to change in terms of your own beliefs or ways of operating or blind spots right now?
Whoever unmutes first. Who wants it? Rich wins.
Well, I actually had to turn loose of a lot. As Betsy on my team and my team knows, I'm a planner, and I think we're having to move really, really fast. And so moving quickly, making decisions, getting everybody at the table and saying, this is where we're going to go. Listening to your board members. I have a lot of interesting board members and lots of diverse opinions, and of course, not all the same, but saying, yep, that matches more with what my team is wanting to do. Let's go that way. Or just moving much quicker than I would have liked. I'm a planner and a more long-term strategist, and this is very quick.
Yep.
So.
Not easy to do. Genya, can we pass it on to you?
Yeah, I think I kind of talked about this earlier a little bit, is that, I've quickly learned that leadership matters more than location. So whether we're, doing this remotely or in person, but in terms of adapting my in-person leadership style, I'm a hugger. I like to connect. I like to be around a table and brainstorm. So for me, I've been really missing sort of, this is wonderful, and I love to see people's faces and have these type of platforms to be able to but there's something different. And so what I've recognized is that it's the principles of my leadership haven't changed, but my techniques have. And so, I think that I build on those types of things. I think Elizabeth knows, like early on, I really spent a lot of time on my backgrounds and making things, fun and engaging. And I tried to stay in touch, bring some light into sort of some of the scary. And I think that, recognizing just that everyone is going to be at different spots in this, and not forgetting the humanity in this, that we have this tendency to try to get something resolved or fixed, to make time for the fact that, like last week, I had 3 people I knew who passed away from COVID-19, and one of which was a father of a close colleague, and the idea of her father who passed away in New York and her being here and not being able to be close, and having to grieve in isolation by herself. She's a single woman, broke my heart. And so how do we, provide support and continue to move things forward, and be able to have the ability to pause when needed. My husband also lost his grandmother last week as well. And this morning at 10 o'clock, we were doing her service online. I mean, these are things that we're having to build into our ability to lead in these environments, and I think we have to be mindful of that. Is that it's as much about how we move our organizations forward and how we respond to things, as much as it is we have to be mindful that these organizations are made up of people.
I really appreciate hearing that, Kenya. I'm so sorry for everything you've experienced. We heard something similar last week from one of our virtual voices, that one of our leaders was saying he's not typically a very empathetic person, but he's really had to change that because of that exact reason. And it's made all the difference in how he's been leading. So thank you for those golden nuggets. That was great. Janine, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about your family. I mean, this is one of those things where I think when this thing first started, people were like, this is like a hurricane or a fire where it happens and then it's over, but it's not. Mm-hmm. It's still going, right? And so, my initial thing is, let's get in there, let's fix this, let's solve this problem. And I had to kind of pivot into, in my own sense, but then in leading to everybody else saying, we have to pace, right? I mean, there's a difference between crisis, and panic, and in the beginning of a fast moving crisis, you're like, boom, 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 kind of all adrenaline. It is not sustainable, and I think that I have to pause and remember that as president, like there's a symbolism, there's a theatrical part of the job where you have to like demonstrate, like we have to pace, and I have to make myself do it so other people will do it. Mm-hmm. And that was, I could just keep going if I wanted to, but then not, I think I can, right? Like I'm Superwoman, but not everybody can. And I'm sure as hell I can't either. And you have to remind yourself that this is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be over very soon. So we have got to shift into a different gear here and help everybody else do that too. So learning that for myself and then sort of trying to figure out how to model it and check in for people is also something that's really important. I mean, I like to check in on people a lot anyway. This is harder because it's sort of like, let's have a video call and ask everybody how they are. Right. That's harder, not everybody wants to share. So those kinds of things are a lot harder, figuring out different methods to keep your finger on the pulse of the health of your organization, because as we're saying, these are human-centric enterprises. This is not machines, these are people. So
Janine, can I just, because I see there's no other question, but I'm wondering if you and the whole panel, like you touched on helping, like ways to help people really feel like they can authentically connect, or ways of helping people deal with ambiguity. Like, have any of you kind of found ways of doing that, or protocols, or something that you found to be especially effective with your teams?
Well, I mean,
and if not, it's fine. I just wondered.
The connecting piece though is interesting, because I feel like here's another thing that is becoming really clear to me. And at first we all wanted to get on all these calls and these video calls as much as possible so we can feel connected, and that's going to make us feel better. And then you realize, what, this is freaking exhausting. There is something fundamentally more exhausting about these video calls, like all day long, one after another. And even like Elizabeth, you were talking about, you're going to go down to one a week, and then you're going to go down to, because at some point we are craving interaction, but we are also not letting each other off the hook, and so I'm trying to like declare a mental health day, like everybody can take a mental health day, and have less, you know, give people actually some more breathing space, as opposed to the instinct is get them on this video so I could see how they are. You know, are you guys okay? As opposed to like, let's put some white space back in the day. And that's kind of one of those things. And then on the uncertainty part, to me, it's all about communication. I mean, again, I'm trying to tell everybody, like, we don't have all the information. This is the information that we have. And this is the framework for how we're going to make our decisions, but we don't have it yet. And just saying it over and over again in a way that people are like, okay, I'm not missing anything. They're not hiding anything. It makes people feel a little calmer, I think, even though you don't have the answers, that you're honest about that as a leader.
Thanks.
That's great. If Rich or Genya would like to answer, I also have one question before we wrap up. So Rich, please.
Yeah, I mean, Janine, that's great, great advice, because I know I found it myself. Is I love to go walk around, and my team probably hates that I go around, walk around and chat with everybody, but I consider myself an introvert and thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'll get all this work done. I'm in the office by myself. It was absolutely horrible. I mean, like you said, it was exhausting to try to figure out, okay, when am I going to talk to this VP? When am I going to talk to this VP? And to try to schedule that out, it was exhausting, and it's just not as meaningful. So trying to take time to touch base while you're doing business, you know, either before or after is critical. But I think we all have to slow down, and that was other good advice. Is you keep going, and I know I did that, and then I think I had just a meltdown and just said, okay, I can't do this anymore. So thanks for those pieces, Janine.
Thank you for being vulnerable, Rich, and telling us that. Genya, did you want to quickly add something before our last question?
You know, I think same. And, you know, creating white space for your teams. I think that, you know, I have worked for previous bosses who would have used this as an opportunity that would have driven them to craziness. I mean, because they, you know, they're sort of a butts and seats type of person. And so this type of environment would, you know, really drive. I'm sort of the opposite. So I have a real trust in our team. And actually what I'm looking for is for me to get off of these, you know, Zoom meetings myself. And so I have taken to, let's, instead of getting on a Zoom, let's do this by call and let's walk, you know, like you go walk in your neighborhood, I'm going to go walk in mine. I also actually, Dr. Davison just reached out to Will Simpkins yesterday, and I'm, you know, bringing him a disinfected bottle of wine later because we're living in the same neighborhood. So just checking in, not only just with the people you work with, but also your partners in this too, and how they're doing, because oftentimes how they're doing is going to depend on your success as well. And so I think that, you know, checking in with everybody and finding different ways to sort of engage them, but also give them some space. I love that whole building in white space back into the day. I love that idea. And I think that that's fair. And I think it's also just, you know, if you're feeling this, you know, imagine others are feeling this as well. And one of my teammates actually said, and you know, in terms of analogies, said that this felt like a tsunami. We all just got swept up in it. And actually what she's more afraid of is the debris that you can't see right now. And so recognizing sort of the fact that we're still in this responsive state as much as we want to be in that thrive state, and giving space for people to kind of get into a safe area so that they're not hit with the debris is sort of what I think we need to offer folks.
Wow. Incredibly insightful, the three of you. Thank you. I'm gonna close with one question. Before I do this, I'd love to ask everybody on the call right now, if you would, in the chat box, would you throw out 1-2 words max of a takeaway that you've gotten from this call so far? We would love to gather this and show our speakers how much we appreciate their time. So throw in 1 or 2 words of some takeaways that you've gotten from this call. We'd really appreciate that. And my last question to you, Genya, Rich, and Janine, is what can we, as your alumni network, your community leaders, what should we be considering? What should we be doing? What should we be thinking about as it relates to education as we move forward? Basically, what can we do for you? Is there something we should be looking at? And Genya, I'm going to start with you and move to Rich and then Janine.
So I could probably have a long list because anybody in education has a long Christmas list, or wish list, if you will, of things that we would love to have for our folks. But I think the one thing right now that resonates for me is as we're adapting and helping our students adapt to this remote learning, there's some students right now who are in, because of the policies and practices that we have in place in education, are at risk of not attaining their degree. And one of those areas is in internships. So a lot of our employer relationships are requiring students to come generally to their place of employment to do internships. So I'm asking you all if at all possible, you have an ability to sort of convert your in-person internships to remote, that allows our students to gain that experience, and also at the same time that credit that they need to graduate would be incredibly helpful for a number of our students. And so we're just looking for some partnerships in that way, and if you can help spread the word, that would be great.
Fantastic. Rich?
Well, we have, as I mentioned, great virtual programming that will come online. So sharing that out to all of those parents that are home looking for great programming is one piece. Also, our young entrepreneurs started a virtual marketplace on Saturday. So that's available on our website. Please go out, click and shop. Lots of incredible gifts for graduation, Mother's Day, and you can pick those up at Young Americans, or they'll mail them to you depending on the vendor. But supporting our ultra small businesses with these young entrepreneurs that are trying to make some money and keep their businesses going.
I love that. I'm going to check that out. Definitely. I'll buy myself a Mother's Day gift. Janine, what about you?
You deserve it.
Thank you. Thank you.
A couple things. I mean, in the short term, I'll tell you the biggest crisis my students are facing is that they're getting fired. Most 85% of our students work 30 to 40 hours a week. And as you know, this crisis is a crisis that's hitting the low skilled workers. I mean, that's what you are when you're in college. And so to the extent, same as Genia was saying, that you have the capacity to hire, part-time or full-time or internships, that is super, super helpful. Another thing I would say is, when you're talking to young people today, they're just so anxious. We had a mental health crisis in this population before this thing started. And, now they're throwing up their hands and, why should I even go back to college? And I mean, if there's one thing that, if you're mentoring these students out there, now's the time to invest in your human capital. You just recognize that you were the first to be laid off because you don't have the skills and you don't have the education. And anything you can do to encourage students to stay in school. I mean, even if it's just, I know you hate these online classes, but let's face it, it's a skill set you got to have. Look at us, we're on these Zoom calls, right? Like, you're going to have to do this stuff. And so just, if you can stay enrolled and get yourself through this next semester, because what happens is if they pause out, they just say, oh, I'm just going to take a semester off or a gap or whatever, they don't come back. And it's not good for the economy. It's not good for our society. It's not good for them as individuals. So if you're mentoring out there, I would just really encourage you to help students have the courage to stay the course, even if the fall is going to be uncertain and weird. It's the one thing they can take control of. And lastly, you can always donate to our Student Emergency Fund, and I'm sure everybody else has one too. So thanks so much for everything you guys do.
Fantastic takeaways. I don't know about everybody else on this call, but this was just filled with amazing insight. I so appreciate the time the three of you have spent, and all of you on this call. A reminder that this is recorded, so if you'd like to revisit some of these questions or thoughts, you can find it on our website within 48 hours. You can also look for future Virtual Voices on our website and on the network. The next one coming up is next Tuesday, May 5th. We'll have Aaron Pulling, the president and CEO of Food Bank of the Rockies, and Christy Judd, president and CEO of Spark the Change Colorado, formerly Metro Volunteers. She's been heading up a lot of the disaster relief through volunteer management. And so it's going to be a great one. We really hope to see you all there. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your afternoons.